today. Thank you, Nikki, for recording. So, welcome to the annual Fireside Chat at iharp. Today we have three panelists. We have Dr. Mathieu Morlighem, we have Dr. Vandana Janeja, and Dr. Shashi Shekhar. Allow me to, I know you're already familiar with them, but I'd like to speak to the accolades briefly, and for those maybe who may not know them in detail. So Dr. Mathieu Morlighem is a professor in the Department of Earth Sciences at Dartmouth College. He is also the PI for the ICE Future Research Lab, and he is also the co-PI of iharp. Welcome, Dr. Mathieu Morlighem. We also have Dr. Vandana Janeja. She is Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Development in the College of Engineering and Information Technology at UMBC. She's also a professor in the Information Systems Department, and she is the PI of iharp as well as its director, and she's also the lead for the Multi-Data Lab at UMBC. Welcome, Dr. Janeja. Lastly, would like to welcome Dr. Shashi Shekhar. He is a professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at University of Minnesota. He's in fact a distinguished McKnight University professor and distinguished university teaching professor. He's also the director of AI Climate Institute, and he is a co-PI at iharp. Welcome, Dr. Shashi Shekhar. So today, the title of our annual Fireside Chat is How to Make Effective Presentations. And we're going to keep this informal. And I know that our panelists are very, very experienced in all of this, given how much they have worked in faculty and how much they have accomplished. So they are the right individuals to speak on this today. And I'm going to start with keeping an open question to all of them, asking them to share their perspectives on making effective presentations. The floor is open. Thank you.
Pick someone to start, I guess.
I'll start with Dr. Mathieu Morlighem.
All right. Somebody has to break the ice. So I've been thinking a lot about this question, and I think I've changed myself a lot how I go about presenting. And there's a lot we could talk about, but I try to narrow down what makes a better speaker, I think. The first thing is to know your audience. I think we don't say it enough. You have to know who you're talking to. You have to know how to pitch a presentation. And maybe more importantly, you have to think about what they are prepared or ready to hear. I know as a presenter, you always have your story and you want to tell them everything you have done on a given project. That will never work. What works is you build a story with 2 or 3 key points, and you give the audience the material to understand what you have done. And also the introduction motivation is very important. You have to find the common ground. Otherwise, you're not giving the audience, or otherwise you're giving them an excuse not to listen to you. So knowing your audience, knowing their background, knowing what the common ground between what you want to tell them and what they have is, to start with that, is key. And I don't want to take too much time because I know this is the first round. But the other thing I will say is, as for anything, if you want to get better as a speaker, it takes 3 things. So training, you have to learn how to do a good presentation. Practice, and everybody will tell you practice. It's true. But the most important part is the third one. It's getting feedback. And getting feedback that's not always enjoyable. I know we've all done this. We've all been talking to people and said, oh, this was a great talk, but internally you're like, it was not so good. This not so good feedback is the most important thing to share with a speaker or a student. And you should say it politely and try to be constructive. But this is how they learn. If nobody tells them what didn't work in a presentation, they're not going to learn. So feedback, positive, and also what could be improved is very, very important.
Thank you. Dr. Shekhar?
Okay. No, Matthew actually distilled, the most important thing, know your audience, right? Because different audiences have different, right, background or knowledge. When we are speaking to undergraduates or PhD students or faculty, right, they have different expectations, and it's important to address them. And if it is mixed audience, probably you have to divide up your talk and address each one, there. So that's very important. And this actually, there is a discipline called communications. I don't know if people have friends who have taken that. So a lot of people, who go in journalism, right, or TV and so on, they actually come from that background. And the adage that Matthew started with, you start with the audience, right? But that they think of the, three things there. So there is a receiver, which is the audience. We talked about it a lot. But there is a sender, who is the speaker. And then there is also the channel or the medium, right? And it's good to be aware of all three, right? So the channel also makes a difference on how we deliver, right? If it is a written communication, like a paper, then the reader can go back and forth and see the details. So they have a lot more freedom and more details can be presented. In technical papers, we do present more details, right? But oral medium has very low bandwidth. So oral medium, as Matthew said, it's better be one or just a couple of messages. And then those messages have to be repeated, because also the cognitive science tells you that the short-term memory is very small for most people. They can hardly remember 5-6 things, for the short term, unless it's repeated quite often. So another thing you may have heard that, the messages that Matthew said you need to pin down, then that has to be repeated. So you first tell them what you are going to tell them, right? Then you tell them in detail, and then come back and tell them what you just told them, right? One can also do other things to check whether the message was received. And in different setting, you will do it differently. In a classroom setting, you can do a very simple multiple choice quiz and see what happened. In a more serious audience, maybe much simpler show of hand binary question or something, right? So those are all there. And then same thing about speaker, different people have different strengths. So depending on your strength, you can do different things. Some people have done theater, and they can use body language and all kinds of things. They can vary the voice. And then there are people like me with very little such training whose natural voice is rather flat. So they have to use some other tactics to break the monotony and so on, right? So these are some, general things that we have learned. And as Matthew said, practice makes it better. So if we do it and get feedback, it gets better. Cool.
Thank you, Dr. Shekhar. Dr. Janeja, may we hear from you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that we are so aligned. I think I was jotting down some points before the panel, and my first statement was know your audience. And I think we are thinking alike. Shashi also mentioned the same thing, right? Because you may be going to technical conferences, or you may be giving a generic talk to like a multidisciplinary group, or you may be giving a talk to students. Even for our students who are teaching assistants, you're talking to students. That's a different audience versus if you're presenting at the conference. So really knowing who your audience is and what your presentation material looks like will depend on who you're speaking to. So that's, I think, the most important thing. And both Shashi and Mathieu addressed that. And I think that's really key. It may also, and also Shashi said something like, reiterating things. And several years ago, I took a creative writing, workshop or something. And I just wanted to write some stories about science. And one of the things they emphasized was say it, explain it, and say it again. So it's true for writing. It's true for speaking. You have to have a message of whatever you're going to deliver. If it's a technical paper, even there, you have a, problem statement. You say the problem statement, how you solved it, and you say the problem statement again, that this is how we did it, right? So you always say it, explain it, and say it again, and there's always this message. The other important thing that I have done is I want people to leave with something, and I think that's essential. If you're doing a 1-hour keynote, or if you're doing a 30-minute conference presentation or a 5-minute conference presentation, you may want them to leave with 1 or 2 key points. they will not remember every single thing about your presentation because, you know, as Shashi was alluding, there may be a paper they can read, or you will have citations in there that they can look up. But what's the 1 or 2 key messages? I think it should be no more than 3 points that they should walk away with. And it's more essential to have that messaging than all the technical details in there. If they don't leave with that, even in a technical presentation, I think there's a gap, right? So sometimes I've even, like at the last minute, I've changed my presentations to make sure the messaging is clear, and I take out some of the technical details because I don't want them to see a graph with like 8 different lines without having them understand what I really want them to take away. So having that takeaway message is important. And you know, one of the important things is if you're not interested in your presentation and you're not excited about your presentation, the audience will not be excited. And for you to be excited, there are a few things, right? One is practice, as Mathieu and Shashi both alluded to, getting feedback, like rehearsing a lot, especially if it's a key presentation, you know, rehearsing as much as possible. If you're, for example, students are doing proposal defenses, do several dry runs, do several rehearsals with faculty members, with others. Funny story, I had a student graduating with his dissertation defense. He did like 8 or 10 dry runs. Finally, people were tired of listening to him, so he went and did the presentation to the dog, just, you know, so that he could, and he did it delivered like a clockwork. So I think some of those things you have to keep in mind. It can depend on what type of presentations. So practice, feedback. And then the other thing I'll say is, you know, be comfortable. You know, wear comfortable things. You don't have to look polished and then bomb your presentation, right? You really want to be comfortable in what you're wearing, how you're speaking, being comfortable with the material. If there's something that you're not sure about, you know, look up information beforehand. Or if you're not aware of something, you can even mention it. But as long as you're comfortable with what you're presenting and how you are feeling, I think the audience will resonate. I think there are some difficult presentations where you can see that the speaker is not comfortable and they don't resonate at all. So practice and being comfortable as well. And of course, using clear and confident voice. Very, very clear. I personally have to work on that a lot and making sure that my voice resonates and I speak out loud. I'm doing that even now as I'm trying it, but being clear and confident as you speak. So those are a few things to keep in mind.
Thank you all so much. I'd like to open the floor to the audience if anyone has a question. Yes, Malloy.
Thank you, Dr. Janeja, for you, and Dr. Shekhar and Dr. Mathieu for your nice talk, nice advice. But one things like I personally face as a student, like, okay, when I'm taking class in front of as a TA in front of my students, okay, I'm fine. But when a lot of professors are in front of me, I feel a little bit nervous. Like, how can I overcome this? Can you please?
Yes, and anyone is free to answer that.
So
Yeah.
I can share 2 things, you know. So one, you know, as Vandana said, you want to feel comfortable. So so if you actually interact with professors, right, so that may take away the unfamiliarity, right? And there are forums. Probably your department has an open house, right, or a holiday party. So maybe, or you go visit in office hours. So may I ask, how often do you visit office hours when you take classes and chat with professors?
For my personal course, I don't visit so much, but for TA, okay, like how to run the courses and how to take the sessions at that time, okay, frequent.
Right. But more interaction, more familiarity, you will not feel, right, as much of a difference. In pandemic, this has been lost. But use office hours and just chat people up. You will be surprised that they will be so receptive. The other part, you know, which you can start imagining. Remember, by the end of PhD, you are supposed to be a peer. You know what I'm saying, right? So all your committee members, all your faculty, they are expecting you to be a peer. And that's basically what they're trying to assess. Are you ready to cut the umbilical cord, right? So they are expecting you to behave like a peer, right? Yeah. Yeah, and there are some other goofy tricks and so on. You can always imagine that your audience is undergraduates that you are comfortable with. Your imagination. The people try to imagine other silly things, which I will not freak up. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Shekhar.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think you would be surprised by how forgiving the audience is to students. We love students. They are the next generation. It's okay to make mistakes. It's not an exam, right? So when you give a talk at a conference, people are not trying to find what you did wrong, but they're interested in overall, what is your story? What did you find? So I think assume good intent, and don't be paralyzed by questions. All my students, the first talk, they're like, oh, I don't know if I will be able to answer questions. And then they realize that by the time it comes to questions, the questions are very simple because the people in the audience are trying to just understand what you've explained, and you are the expert. You know what you have done. So questions is never problematic. And really assume good intent. People in the audience, they want to learn from you.
That's great. That's great advice, and I'll add a couple things as well. So, my advisor actually gave me this advice, and I use a lot of her advice. So, she used to say that by the end of the second year or third year, like when you're getting ready for proposal defense, you have more expertise as a student because you have read a lot more and you've spent a lot more like focused time on your topic. So in a way, you are the expert in the room at that time because you have studied the topic more than anybody else. So the only thing, going back to what Mathieu was saying earlier, is practice. That makes you more confident. And to the point about questions, there's a secret thing, it's not a secret, since I'm saying it here, but I feel like if somebody asks you a question, if you need time to think about it and really understand the question, it doesn't hurt to say, can you please clarify that question? Or, ask them to repeat the question. Oftentimes when you do that, they will actually add more information, which would be helpful for you to think about it. So it doesn't hurt. If you understand the question, great, you can respond. But if you don't, then it doesn't hurt to ask the question again. But I agree with what was said earlier that, as a student, you are really in a good place to make mistakes, use this as your playground, learn from it as well.
Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
Nice
And
advice.
I will add just one last thing. So you can go in the exam viewing it as really a pass-fail exam, but that's probably not the best way to view it. Your advisor probably has helped you practice several times, right? So usually you should view the exam as a free review of the paper you are writing and planning to submit. Because as Vandana said, you already know more about the topic, right, than the professors, and they will learn from you. So by the time you reach, I don't think the question is pass and fail. Just look at the statistics. You tell me in your department how many PhD students didn't clear a written preliminary exam or oral preliminary. Any guess what's the percentage? Success
I
ratio?
think it is 99.999.
Maybe not.
So why are you anxious? You know what I'm saying? It's getting a free review. That's what it is. By the time you go there, maybe if you have published a paper, then even your community is accepted.
Thank you, Dr. Shekhar.
Thank you. Do we have any other question from the audience? And while they're thinking, we know that you're experts, you've practiced presentations for your entire careers. Could you think of any time midway through a presentation and it wasn't going right? The challenges that you were experiencing and how did you navigate that? And this is useful for our students who are going for job talks. They might be experts, but they should be able to, expect some hiccups at some point.
So maybe I can share my first job talk. It was in MCC in Austin. And so my thesis topic was a little bit off the mainstream, which probably many of us know, many of you know I'm a little bit of a contrarian. And so on the third slide, they just stopped me. They were trying to understand a very basic concept. And now 45 minutes, 50 minutes pass by on the third slide. and then say, oh, okay, time is running out. You have 5 minutes to wrap up your talk. This is basically what happened. So fortunately, we were told to have several summary slides. So there was a contribution claim slide, which is in the, somewhere early and then towards the end, and you kind of go to your summary slide and so on. But these things happen. Another talk, which was not a job talk, it was a campus presentation. And most of the spatial topics are very visual, right? So you have all your maps and this and that. And same thing, after a couple of slides, the projector bulb goes out and they don't have a backup bulb. So next 30, 40 minutes, you don't have your slides, right? So again, there I was not prepared, but so we had to just improvise and talk through. But in more critical thing that this, for example, AI climate reverse site visit, we had written narratives for time management and also for, worrying about the Zoom can go out and stuff like that. And suddenly one speaker is out of the loop and somebody else has to pick up the thread. So there are those kind of tactics, having summary slides, having narratives. If you can anticipate the surprise, you can do something. But key thing is, as Vandana said, be comfortable. You are the expert in the room, whether there are slides or this and that, you can still focus on your key messages, your talking points.
I'll jump in maybe with a couple of examples. And the example Shashi gave, I think all of them have happened. The Zoom was not available, or the projector was not there, or I was not able to hook up the laptop. These things happen. The more you present, chances are you have experienced these situations as well. So I think really being prepared, we have a lot of reliance on PowerPoint. It's important. Yes, we should have good quality PowerPoint with like few text things and not reading from the slide, all of the standard technical things, but also being prepared about the topic. You may not remember every single detail that you had on slides, but you have to have knowledge about what you were going to speak, because it may happen that now you have to speak extempore and then you still have to engage the audience. Visuals are great at engaging, but if not, then I think Shashi was giving an example of engaging with questions, show of hands or something or the other, where you try to engage the audience. Also, reading the room is important, because if you feel like your message is falling on flat ears, going back to what Mathieu was saying earlier, knowing your audience, understanding what they are there to listen about, what they are interested in, is important to know, because then you can go back to the messaging that they might be most interested in. You may have done the best algorithm, but if you're speaking to, let's say, policymakers, they may not be interested in the technical details. So really, if you're prepared to give a technical presentation, you quickly have to pivot if need be. So if you're not prepared, pivoting is important during the presentation as well. So one example I'll give you where I pivoted right before the presentation. So I was at a workshop and I had a technical presentation, talking about the paper, which my student couldn't present. So I was presenting for the student who was the first author. And I just realized that, the messaging that the audience was looking for was different than what I had in the slides. They were really interested in some core contributions. They were from the questions that I was hearing. So I just stepped out for a few minutes. I just made it in a story-like thing, still the same technical details, but added some story elements to it, went back in to present. So I was probably the last or second to last presenter. So sometimes pivoting may happen in real time, or pivoting may happen before the presentation. But I think those are the things that you have to keep in mind and be ready to pivot. May not work 100% of the time, but the more you prepare, the better off you are.
Thank you. Dr. Sherman, you have a question?
More of a comment. As the son of a professional editor, I encourage the next generation to find people they trust, to view their material, and to give them honest feedback offline, and take the benefits of those outside perspectives. That will greatly improve not only presentations, but also papers and even proposals, if you have the right people you're working with. So there's almost nothing that can't be improved by having an outside set of eyes, knowledgeable eyes. Take a look at it. So that's the related point here, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sherman. We
Yeah.
have a question. Yeah. Go on, Dr. Shekhar, please.
Yeah, no. I think the what Chris is saying, the fashionable term is called red teaming, right? Even in high stakes, you have an internal set of people just act as the audience or reviewer. It helps a lot. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your nice experience sharing and suggestion. So I have also another question related to your experience, like how your presentation skill evolved from your early stages, like during your PhD studies, and from like early faculty, and now being the experienced members of the community. How have you evolved your presentation and communication skills? If you can share some examples. Thank you.
I guess I can jump in just to switch it up a bit. So one of the things that I have evolved is actually two things. One is the tone of the presentation, how you present, the type of voice, and how much gesturing, those things I have really honed in on. The second thing is what I've realized is less is more, right? Sometimes you want to cram so many things into a presentation. It's always hard to do. It's a tough balancing act because you do so many things, right? How to convey more information with less. So using less words, using visuals, using key messaging points so that you conclude with like 2 or 3 takeaways. I think those are things that come with experience. And then I'll cheat and say one more thing is, again, going back to the point that if you're not comfortable, presenting, the audience will read it and the presentation will flow like that. So it means everything in terms of your content, you're comfortable, how you're presenting is, comfortable, all of those things, and confidence comes with that. So some of those things I think come with time and reiterating and, evolving.
Thank you, Dr. Janeja.
So
Yeah.
personally, I remember that my first presentations, and maybe the first, few years, I thought that I really had to go deep into the nitty-gritty details to show that it was hard, that I understood the problem. And I got feedback, and then I realized this was completely the wrong way of doing things. You're giving the audience essentially an excuse to not listen because it's way above what their working memory can process. So it's better to stay high level and do, I think there was an AGU presentation about communication. They call it snorkel statements. So it's okay to go a bit deep. There are some people that are equipped with the gear. They know how to scuba dive. They can go down with you, but there are a lot of people who can't do it. So you have to go back up to the surface and synthesize in one sentence or two what you just talked about so that you keep people engaged as you go. And yeah, again, I don't think you need to go into equations and how you solve them. It's not what people are there for. I mean, most of the time, unless you're going to a computing conference where that's what it is about. So less technical and more higher level view of the topic.
Right. And I all of those I think apply to me as well, right? So as a PhD student, very technical. Also, I didn't know the local culture as well, right? We didn't really study Western, culture or history growing up in India. Right? So it took some time. But one of the things Mathieu said, even in Berkeley, as PhD student, we were told your job talk has 3 parts. So 3/3. So 1/3 is for everybody in the room, and that better be relatively broad and simple, like societal motivation or motivation for the entire field. The second third was for people in your field. So you relate to some debate in your own. So within computer science, you may have a slice called database or data mining or AI, right? So those people enjoy. And third, you can go and do something just to show your technical skills in a job talk, which is okay, right? So younger, the expectations are also different, right? The people do want to see your rigorous research skills. So there has to be 1/3 of the talk, which is sort of snorkeling going down, right? But you want to at least say 1/3 is for everybody. Now, this mix, as your career sort of evolves, that mix changes, right? So as you become more senior, then the first third increases, right? Maybe it is now half, right? And the second third maybe becomes quarter, right? And third even becomes less, right? And then there are other type of tactics, which, I don't know if you have watched high schoolers do speech or debate, or even the politicians when they speak. So, so they have other tactics. One of them is from Aristotle called ethos, pathos, logos. I don't know how many of us know these three terms. Ethos, pathos, logos, right? So logos is logic. We are very well trained in logic, and our tendency is to focus on logic, okay? But pathos is emotion. And that's, as you get gross senior, you would use it more and more to basically invoke some kind of emotion, happiness or alarm, whatever. Look at all the climate literature. The first thing they say, the world will end, right? We have to save the planet. That's not logic. That's emotion, right? And of course, the ethos is your credibility. So as you build your track record, people would start trusting you more and more. But even when you have a peer-reviewed paper and all that, you can assume that you have the credibility, right? So you don't need to get into every nitty-gritty detail. So these are the things. The other tactics you learn, particularly if you are engaging with current debate, including climate. I mean, you see how contentious it is, right? Right? Any day a tweet can come and we all have to rethink what we are doing. I'm just joking. It's not as serious. But if you have a very contentious audience, one of the tools people use is, so logic can be debated. However rigorous is your logic, it can be debated, right? But story is hard to debate with. So these are other tactics depending on your audience. If you walk into a very contentious place, then it's better to just tell stories and not show theorems, proofs, and experiments. So, but as your career stages, your audiences get a little diverse, and the ratio changes.
Yeah, thank
But
you
it's
so
a
much.
long career, Yeah, these tricks we learn as we go, as we need it.
Yeah, definitely this helps. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll have a question for Dr. Mathieu. Could you share how you prepared for your TED Talk? We always see these TED Talks and they seem like very cool people. Would love
think
to
TED
hear
Talk,
how you prepared for that. Yeah.
they are very different talks. So you have a coach that sort of helps you narrow down your story and the visuals you want to use, and it's very non-scientific in a way. So they really want you to use as many anecdotes as possible. They want you to use storytelling. So we learn best by stories, and that's what captivates people's attention. Even in a talk, in the middle, if you want to give people a break so that they come back to you, if you start by saying, I'm going to tell you a story, everybody will wake up and listen to you. So it's a great way of showing a picture from the field and telling them what happened. Just to give people a break, you'll bring them back. So the TED Talk was a lot of what analogy can you use to make people understand something that may be too complicated for like somebody from the street to understand, but at the same time you want to captivate their attention. So there were more elements of that, and I think that really helped. And then on site the day before, there was a coach that helped. So you had to, basically give your talk, and they would tell you, you're standing too much like this, you should be more like that, stop walking, and that was also very helpful because nobody tells you how you should stand and behave and breathe. The breathing was also key because you want to say so much with the stress that you don't realize that the pace at which you're providing information is not right. So having this feedback also helped. Anyway, so it's a bit all over the place. They helped you with design, with the story, with how to say, with analogies, but also the presence and how to behave on stage. It was a great experience.
So may I add one thing about stories?
Go on, Dr. Shekhar.
So we all watch movies, right? Bollywood, Hollywood, or whatever. So in some movies we like, right? We stay there through the end of the movie. Other movies we walk out at halftime. So what's the difference? Which are the stories or movies where we sit through the end, and which are the ones where we walk out in the middle? What makes a difference? So again, I guess there are different tactics, but one of the Hollywood, very successful story writer was interviewed, and they were saying that one tactic is to have a conflict. So in the beginning, you introduce, but you kind of have a conflict in the middle, and then the audience is likely to come back to figure out how the conflict was resolved. Okay, so in a Bollywood movie, it's boy meets girl, but somebody, a family member, somebody don't want them to be together, right? And then it has to be resolved. In a research one, like Vandana was saying, right, in computer science research, we often define a problem, right? The conflict is created by saying why the problem is hard or challenging. And now the audience wants to know, okay, how was that overcome, right? So these are very, abstract ways to engage the audience, but explaining why is it non-trivial? Why can't an average person in the industry do it? Why does it take a PhD thesis to do it? But those are very subtle tactics. This is essentially storytelling, but this is used in a lot of proposals and papers and presentations. And I think originally, apparently, this was used by Shakespeare. This is his trick. He was one of the first drawing a lot of audience to his theater.
Dr. Janeja, something to
Yeah, I
share?
was just going to say that storytelling is a very important theme that you may have heard all three of us say multiple times. Because if you understand who you're speaking to, and if you say your stuff, tell your story, it resonates a lot more than 10 different algorithms that you put together in a presentation. If you have the overarching motivation very clear, let's say you're doing proposal defense or some technical presentation. If you have a motivating scenario or a motivation very clear, that's your story. And then you connect it throughout. Don't just say the story once, but connect it throughout. So here's the story of why I'm doing this. Here's the data that reflects on that story. Here are the results that reflect on the story. Here's the conclusion that reflects on the story. It should be a running theme and a running thread. I think that's critical to have people, again, leave with a message, leave the presentation with a message. It could be one or two things, but if you don't emphasize that throughout, they will not take anything away. And in terms of preparation, I wanted to mention something, at the beginning of iHarp, I did this GritX talk at UMBC. And, I started with this really long technical presentation. It had to be condensed to 10 minutes and really show the importance of the work. So I made the presentation. I thought I was ready. And I really wanted to make sure it resonates with audience who have never heard about, let's say, AI being used for, polar science problem domain and so on. So I asked my middle schooler at that time, and I presented to him. And he just came up right away and he said, some of the things made sense to him, some of the things didn't make sense to him. And then he actually identified, oh, this thing should be highlighted, that should be a box, in his own fun way. So that was very nice. But I think presenting to a non-technical audience is also another way to prepare, so that you can tell whether the story will resonate with non-technical audience, people who are not in your field. And I think people say commonly, like, you can present it to your grandmother, and if she understands, then you've made your point. So preparing with non-technical audience.
Thank you.
Can I add something on the key points, because I think this is like probably one of the key elements of, as always, I mean, this is part of a presentation. Whether your presentation is 5 minutes or 1 hour, you have to narrow it down to 2 or 3 elements. So know your audience and also 2 or 3 takeaways. One thing that I see students do too frequently is their last slide is a nice landscape, sunset, thank you. These are useless. Your last slide will be probably the one that stays the longest on the screen, because it's going to stay there as people ask questions. If you have your key takeaways there, your key figure, it will go a long way, because even people that may not have listened, they may take the time to read them at this point. So anyway, don't underestimate the how important the last slide is, because it's going to stay on for a long time.
Thank you so much. We have a question from the audience.
So I have a question for the audience, if that's okay, Josephine. Because people have presented here, everyone has presented, and I see some faculty members too. I'm wondering if people have, things that they have used and are effective. If they can share, maybe, folks who have presented, even students, right? Something may have worked for them and they were happy with their presentation.
Yes, Dr. Sherman.
I think one of the key things for the next generation to keep in mind is that mistakes are easily overcome by persistence. And so you may know you flubbed a line on slide 7, but that's okay. You keep going, and you'll be able to basically present the material again in a different venue, and you won't make that mistake again. This is not, this is not Mortal Kombat. This is talking to friends, more or less, and they will forgive you for not getting the story perfect your first go. And this applies especially to people giving their PhD talks as they get out into the wide world. It doesn't have to be perfect. You will get another chance, and learn from those experiences. It will get easier, and you'll be more comfortable, and that will enable the story to go forward with increasing clarity, even if your self-criticism is, distinct. Your colleagues will help you deal with that, and you will go forward improved by the experience.
So may I just add one thing? Yeah. And, with these nowadays, with tools like WebEx or Zoom, actually, it's much easier to observe that. You can record your talk and just listen to it yourself, right? And if you find something you felt needs to be revised, you can revise it, right? You can even write a narrative. In fact, may I put Shubhankar on the spot? He did use some tactics in the last ACM6 spatial. So maybe Shubhankar, do you want to share that and whether it helped you or not?
Yeah, I think usually in my previous conference presentations, what I used to do was I would just keep practicing on my own. And when I would go to the stage to present, I would actually like have so many things in my mind, and I would be like, you have an adrenaline rush and you tend to forget a lot of things that you had practiced. So I think that would sometimes have an effect on my presentation. But the last time I think, as Professor Shekhar and many of you were suggesting, I think having like a transcript of something that you want to talk about, or at least the main points for each slide that we want to talk about, I think that actually keeps us on track with respect to the message that we want to convey for a specific slide. And I think that actually helps us not just with respect to our presentation, but also with respect to our time management, because for any presentation, like in a conference, we have just 15 minutes. And if for one slide we are, spending 5 or 6 minutes just because we have lost track of what we were supposed to say at that point in time, I think later on that affects the slides that would be following our current slide that we have kind of affected. Yeah. So I think, yeah, I mean, having a transcript, or at least what I do right now is like present in a presenter's view, and at least I jot down what points I want to convey for each of the slides, and I make sure that, okay, if I have to spend 1 minute on that specific slide, I convey these points, and then I can ensure that yeah, I'm keeping track of the time. But even then, I think I ran out of time in my presentation, and I think the last 4 or 5 slides I had to run it fast, and the session chair kept telling me, "You're running out of time." So I'm like, okay. But yeah, I think having a summary slides, like Professor was mentioning, I think that would be helpful, and I'm trying to do that for the next time. I did not do it as expression, but I think that helps as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Shubhankar.
Thank you, Shubhankar. I can share something, and these are two different experiences. So for one of them, I was invited to give a talk at the Department of Justice, and it was a Zoom talk, and they had probably over 100 people on there. So time was of the essence in managing the presentation. They had us, we were selected to speak on specific points, and the presentation had to be prepared a month in advance. But as we prepared the slides, the Department of Justice people are overseeing this presentation, made us write bullet points under the slides that you were selected to speak on. And that helped. It was, made the presentation easy and seamless, because then you knew exactly what you're going to talk about. You didn't meander, you didn't lose your chain of thought. So that was very, very useful, and also made the whole the nerves sort of disappear. The anxiety, was under control, because at least you had your talking points right in front of you. The other unique scenario that I had was when I was still working at UMass Boston. I had to make a pitch in collaboration with an entrepreneur, and this was for a grant. It was very intense, because the pitch was only 5 minutes. We were coached to do this, but it was different working with an entrepreneur, because it required a faculty lead to do the presentation. But the entrepreneur was used to making these presentations, because he was always looking for venture capitalists to fund him. So he was really experienced at this. I had to go through an interesting coaching to speak on an educational tool and its validity and importance in 5 minutes. I practiced so hard that it was ingrained in my brain. But as soon as I walked out, it was, all was gone. But to be honest, in the beginning, when we did the first trial, it was horrible. I didn't know half of the things that I said. But after practicing for a while with this entrepreneur, it became clear the talking points, the flow, and everything. So the practice helped, the coaching helped, and understanding that someone from a different perspective, who is used to different audiences, could also help you, in this space. So, yeah. Do we
Can I
have
add
any?
something on the
Yes,
on
please.
the transcript is a double-edged sword. I think there's two problems with it. I think it's a very good practice to do it, especially early on, to make sure that everything is balanced and you know what to say. But you shouldn't develop some sort of dependence, or sometimes you're like, if I don't have my notes, I don't know what to say. And there will be presentations where you don't have presenter mode. On my first faculty interview, I was relying on these notes, of course, except that the podium was like 20 meters at the other end of the room, and I had a clicker, and I had to stay at the other side of the room. So you have to be ready to not have your notes. And it's actually, you're going to see that you're more engaging, you use more eye contact. There is nothing more annoying that I know that now that I'm on the other side, we notice when people read their slides, and it's really not good. It's almost like, no, you're not going to get the job. So use it, but not too much, to make sure that you practice, you know what to say, that you're on time, but be ready to do it without your notes.
I was thinking something similar too, that, there are different people, different styles of presentation. Some people are very good at keeping notes and following them and, doing it synergistically, but some people who are more extempore, and they just speak up things. And I'm on the latter side too, that, I feel like if I make notes, it actually throws me off, because then I'm like constantly thinking, what did I write in my notes? So I try not to do that. If one or two words are there to jog the memory, I would put it in a bullet on the page itself, but not separately. Some people are very good at following the presenter's notes. So we talked about a lot of delivery, but not about the mechanics of making the presentation itself. So if you are going to use presenter's notes, rehearse with that in a way that it appears organic, not that it appears like you're reading somewhere and people are thinking, oh, they're reading from something else. And if you want to rely on notes, it's better to keep it on the slide like a word or two, rather than having long notes. But I think Shashi had a comment here as well.
Oh, okay. No, it's more of a time management tool. That's basically it. So roughly an average speaker speaks about 100 words per minute. So if you have a short talk, like Josephine was saying, so for 5-minute talk, my guess is, Josephine, you had about a 500-word narrative, and then you were doing your, emotions and so on. So it's a good time management tool. But as both of you said, you don't necessarily have to follow that, but you kind of know how much you can really say on each slide. So yeah, you don't have to have in front of you. Teleprompts are not always there, right? And it can look very boring, but it manages time. And second thing, sometimes you are doing multiple speakers, and it also helps in coordination between the multiple speakers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I did want to highlight something that Shubhankar said. Nowadays, when you record yourself, like on a WebEx Assistant or a Zoom or Otter or things like that, it spits out the summary points, the key points. I think that's an interesting tool. I have never tried that. So that might be interesting, that if you get the key points, it's something for you to jog your memory on. But I've never tried that. It might be interesting. But the other point I did want to make is, we said a lot of things about delivery, right? I want to go back to the points about actually making the presentation. And I think Mathieu was alluding to it, right? Like, you don't want to be reading from the slides, and if there's too much text on it. So, some things that help is, have I don't know if there's a fixed ratio, maybe Shashi or Mathieu know about it, but less text is better. Bullet points are better than long paragraphs. You don't want to be reading like lines of text, and you should not be repeating the same words that are in those lines of text. More imagery, more connection between slides. Like if you're transitioning from one section to the other, you say something about that. Don't just say, okay, now we are on slide 5 and I'm going to say this, right? You want to have a story arc as well. And then again, more graphics. But again, when you're having graphics and visuals, too much of that could also be problematic. Again, less is more. So weave it in the narrative, less text, but speaking more, engaging more. Definitely not walls of text. I think Christopher has points as
well. I concur, and for those of you who remember view graphs, that would be me, perhaps, in this audience. The improvement in the ability to convey information in a very concentrated form it's light years over where it was back when I was in early grad school. The ability to actually make slides was a huge step forward in my department, instead of using view graphs. The ability to not rely on rapidograph pens on a drafting table to create graphics that could then be turned into slides was a huge step forward. Early computer graphics is what I'm driving at there. We've benefited so much from generations of increasing capability in presenting information that we need to remember sometimes where we came from, how hard it was to create a 12-minute talk, much less an hour. I can't imagine doing a TED Talk back when I was in early grad school. The capabilities for presentation sometimes blind us to the fact that the message has to be still in the vein of KISS. And everybody should know what that acronym stands for. But, you know, keep it simple, folks, is one version of that, you know, because you have this much time with this audience to make your case. And so the good news is we know you can do it. You've gotten here. You're going to be fine. And better yet, you're going to be done in roughly 15 minutes. And you can go take a break and walk around the presentation space, catch up with friends, because you know it's important to just be able to know you've done your bit and you can move back to being in the audience and picking up new insights from your colleagues who are about to present in the same sessions that you're going to. So just keep it simple. Make sure you get it done and move on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schumann, for those final thoughts. And we are right on the mark of time. And this conversation could go on because I'm sure our audience and our panelists have a lot to share. But I'd like to really appreciate our panelists for what they have shared. They have not only given insights to our students and many of the people on here, but also have shared some relatable experiences, so folks can know and understand the journey as it has evolved for them as presenters to where they are now, as experts. So thank you so much, panelists. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can send them directly to them. Yeah, so that is it. Thank you all for being here and for taking the time.
Thank you.
So much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Josephine, for chairing the panel.
Absolutely.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.